Hi everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are looking at a 1500-year-old stone block that is, quite literally, a time machine. It's this incredible artifact that transports us directly back to the fading days of a legendary empire in ancient India. And it gives us this unvarnished window into their military culture, some profound personal sacrifices, and the really complex social structures of the time. We're talking about the Bhanugupta Eran Inscription. Okay, let's dive into this. 510. This massive number isn't just a rough estimate. It is the exact year this history was literally set in stone. Because it was dated so precisely using the ancient Gupta-era system, this inscription acts as a concrete anchor in a period of history that is honestly often really difficult to piece together.
Now, you might be wondering, how do we actually extract living history from a silent rock? Well, think of it like CSI, Ancient India. We rely on a field called epigraphy. See, unlike later literary works, which can be heavily colored by myth and legend, ancient inscriptions give us the hard facts. They are contemporary, unvarnished detective evidence. Through this kind of work, we can decode the names of rulers, uncover societal norms, and pinpoint massive political events right as they were happening.
So, here is the map of our historical investigation today. We'll start with Section 1, the stone that speaks. Then, Section 2, the fading of an empire. Next is Section 3, Goparaja and the battle, followed by Section 4, the record of Sati, and we'll wrap up with Section 5, decoding ancient society.
Starting off with Section 1, the stone that speaks, discovering Erakina.
So this artifact was discovered in central India in a place called Eran, which back in the day was known as Erakina. And Eran was an absolute archaeological gold mine. It was a major political and religious hub hooked up to some really important ancient trade routes. The linguistic clues on the stone itself are fascinating. It's written in Sanskrit, which at that time was the ultimate marker of elite royal prestige. On top of that, it's carved using the highly sophisticated Gupta Brahmi script, and it was explicitly created during the rule of a later Gupta king named Bhanugupta. Without this stone, our knowledge of Bhanugupta's authority would basically be non-existent.
Moving right along to Section 2, fading of an empire, the later Gupta period.
Let's move to and see how this builds across time. The Gupta dynasty first rose up in the 4th century and hit its absolute golden age in the 5th century under incredibly powerful rulers who expanded their territory and oversaw massive cultural achievements. But by the early 6th century, things were rapidly unraveling. Central authority was totally declining, and local chiefs were stepping into the power vacuum. And right in the middle of this fracturing, chaotic landscape, in the year 510 CE, Bhanugupta's Eran Inscription was created.
The contrast here is just night and day. In the early Gupta Empire, the emperors held strict, centralized control. Subordinate rulers fell strictly in line. But fast forward to Bhanugupta's era, and it's a completely different story. Power became highly decentralized. Controlling those distant territories became practically impossible. So provincial governors gained fierce independence, and local military chiefs became the new heavy hitters.
And we absolutely can't talk about this decline without looking at the external pressures, specifically the Hunas. These were Central Asian invaders pushing hard into the Indian subcontinent, attacking the northwest, and severely destabilizing Gupta military strength. Now, the inscription doesn't explicitly name them, maybe out of royal pride or just pure politics, but they are a massive piece of the puzzle driving the instability of this time.
Which brings us to Section 3, Goparaja and the battle, loyalty in a fractured empire.
Zooming back in on the stone itself, the main character of our inscription actually isn't King Bhanugupta at all. It's his military officer, Goparaja. The stone goes out of its way to describe Goparaja as incredibly brave, courageous, and fiercely loyal. He fought and tragically died in a major battle. What's so crucial to understand here is that giving a local military officer such prominent status on a royal inscription proves something profound. It shows us that as the Central Empire weakened, kings were desperately depending on the personal loyalty and military muscle of these local warriors.
But here is where our ancient detective work, it's a snag. The inscription vividly records Goparaja's heroic death, but it completely omits the enemy's name and the exact location of the conflict. Historians heavily suspect this battle was against the Hunas, given the timeline and those external threats we talked about. But the stone remains stubbornly silent on the exact identity of the foe. It's almost like a glaring typo in the historical record.
Let's look at Section 4, the record of Sati, devotion and sacrifice.
Now, we need to look at the most historically famous and complex part of this inscription.
According to the text, after Goparaja died in this mysterious battle, his wife followed him in death by entering his funeral pyre. This act being explicitly recorded on the stone makes the Eran inscription historically unique. It provides the earliest clear, written, or epigraphic evidence of the practice of Sati. Just to be clear, this doesn't mean the practice originated in 510 CE, but it is the earliest surviving stone record of it actually happening.
So when we're faced with evidence like this, we have to ask a really critical question. Does this one inscription mean Sati was a universal and compulsory practice for all women across the Gupta Empire?
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it breaks down that exact misconception. Ancient India had incredibly diverse social traditions. This record of Sati was deeply tied to very specific elite warrior ideals of loyalty and honor. It was absolutely not a compulsory or universal practice. Social customs varied wildly depending on your region, your economic status, and local traditions. In fact, if we look at other sources from the exact same period, we see women holding major roles in religious activities, education, and property matters. So this inscription represents one highly specific slice of elite military class expectations, not the entirety of women's lives.
And that leads us to our final phase, Section 5, Decoding Ancient Society, Reading Between the Lines.
When we really read between the lines of Goparaja and his wife's story, we start to see the absolute core values of the later Gupta elite. Heroism was everything. Dying in battle earned you massive respect. Loyalty, whether that meant faithfully serving the king or intense marital devotion, was considered the ultimate virtue. Sacrifice, literally death for duty, was glorified. These concepts of honor were basically the social glue holding this fading society together. And overlaying the whole shebang was religion. Eran was a major center for Vaishnavism, which shows just how deeply religious devotion permeated their entire worldview.
But doing rigorous historical analyses means we have to recognize the limitations of our artifact. Step 1 is acknowledging what the stone explicitly tells us: the names, the exact date of 510 CE, the battle, and the tragic aftermath. Step 2 is identifying what's missing. We don't know the enemy, we don't get Bhanugupta's full biography, and we only see a tiny fraction of society. So, step 3 is the really critical one. Historians have to cross-reference this single stone with other evidence. We're talking coins, temple ruins, sculptures, and literature. That is how we actually build a complete, accurate picture of ancient India.
And honestly, that is exactly why this single block of stone is so significant. It is the finest example of how inscriptions transform silent stones into voices of history. It forces us to look past just the dry dates and battles and directly into the human elements, the loyalty, honor, and sacrifice that defined a civilization over 1,500 years ago. It kind of leaves you wondering, right? If our modern society were to fracture today, what single stone, what isolated record of our deepest values and most controversial practices would we leave behind for historians to uncover in 1,500 years? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the past, and I'll see you next time.